Merry Christmas, Counter-Strikers. One more video to end the year for 2024. And of course, it'll be about the HLTV Awards and the Top 20, which is one of the most talked about things at the end of every year, of course. I think the kind of top 4, top 5 are locked in, but obviously big discussions about who will be placed where in that top 20. And there's usually some questionable ones and some very understandable ones that people have a lot of debate about. So I'm going to do my own now in this video. And we're going to have a quick chat about, debate about where it will go, of course, in the comment section, on Twitter, whatever. I had to put a little feeler out on Twitter as an opening post for it. But let's get into it right now. So it's very tough, this. Very, very tough. I mean, there's lots of discussions that you can look at least for me. When I do this, it's like when you weigh up achievements versus pure stats versus recency bias. You can kind of always feel like you've done someone dirty. I sort of don't envy anyone who makes those decisions. You have to kind of look at the MVPs, the EVPs, which is what I'll be doing in this video. But let's just see how at least it will turn out in a sort of a first draft as such. And kind of what I have gone for. Some picks are like kind of from my heart a little bit. Some picks are from my head, where I think it's kind of logical. A pick that's kind of from my heart and where we'll start here is going to actually be the main man for one of the stories of the year, and that's Senzu from the Mongols, right? I just think some kind of Mongolian representation from the Mongols would be the right thing to have on this list after the year they've had. Of course, we have to talk about the fact that it was 910 that got the MVP for Yellow Compass, of course. But I think Senzu, even though he bombed out in terms of his form in the Perfect World Major playoffs, I think that was a big blight on his year. He's just been so damn good overall, and it kind of shocked the scene in a way that I think it's worth having him in there. I want him in there as a pick of a player that I think has done something amazing this year. So we're going to go with that. One player that I think is very debatable, I'm not sure it even really should be in here, but usually is, which is why I've got him right down at the very bottom, is Keserato. If you look at his stats for the year, very solid, as they always are, but impact in terms of Furia's results in big events has not been that great at all. We know Furia have kind of only just been ramping up a little bit toward the end of the year, looking slightly better, but Keserato is often the main point man for that, and has been for his entire duration on the team almost. One of the longest serving members, of course, on a single org at this point. I think there's a good argument just for the lack of EVPs and the lack of results he's had this year. He can't get top 20 off of rating alone. And there are some notable omissions that I've made here to sort of put him in. For example, Imma, who got MVP for IEM Rio. You've got the likes of Zontix, who has won so much this year, who I think maybe deserves it, even though he has had his question marks in sort of these big events too. Brollan, I think, is one that I don't have in here that, again, could be one that could be in the discussion. But I'm going to stick with this, just sort of rating alone. The fact he's rated quite significantly higher in the big events, top 30 on LAN, than some of those other players. I'm going to stick with him just as a pure top 20 player of the year if we put results to one side. In the same sort of boat, we have the next sort of 2 or 3 on my list here. The next one is going to be Elige. I think that is it kind of makes sense to a lot of people. He absolutely deserves to be on the top 20 this year. He's been the main carry for Complexity, and I think how good he has been has elevated them to some great results over the calendar year. I think he has a couple of EVPs as well. But realistically, you have to look at this and say, you can't really have him any higher because of the achievements, right? Complexity have not really made many big event playoffs. They've had maybe one run over the course of the year, which was super impressive, and maybe it was in a more of a group stage game where they had some of their best results as well before it really got down to the nitty gritty. So I'm going to have him in the top 20. Maybe people will argue that his because of his rating, that's a bit low, but off of achievements, that's what I'm sticking with. And same goes here with my next one, which is going to be Nerds pretty much the same argument here for Nertz. I think he's been incredible. I think he has ascended as a player. There was arguments, he was a bit of a noob stomper and would, do amazing in groups and then fall off when it comes to playoffs. Heroic have elevated everyone on the Heroic has elevated their level, and they could have easily beaten G2 in that incredible quarterfinal in the Perfect World Major. So, he certainly has improved his level when it comes to the big games, and that is why I think he deserves to be, a spot above Elige. This one might be a little bit more controversial because of his level this year, but also some of the missed results. Now, Xantares probably is one of the players of the year for me. I think he's got an EVP or two. I think he's also at a point now where he is so he's almost 30. I think he is 30 if I'm not mistaken. I'm gonna look at that right now just to I've got to get it, guys. I'm gonna get fact checking. He's 29. So he's been doing this at this ridiculously high level for so long. I think he was robbed of a top 20 spot when he was on Big, when he had that great year when he reached world #1 in the online era. The Eternal Fire system is very, very solid, and we saw that through multiple results this year. The Pro League final could have easily gone Eternal Fire's way. That could have been an MVP for performance for Xantares. But missing out on the Perfect World Major is a massive blight on their year. I just think he's been so ridiculously damn good, and his entry success. I think if you dig into some of the deeper stats, his entry percentage is insane. He's close to Donk. In terms of rating when it comes to opening kills. He deserves a spot in the top 20, and because of how good he is in that particular stat alone, and how good his pure rating is, I've actually got him above Nertz and Elige, which people might say it's a bit too low, people might say it's accurate, people might say it's he doesn't deserve to be above these two, but I'm sticking with that. And we'll see how it goes. This is obviously going to be very hard to gauge exactly, but we shall see. Now, next one, there's a couple of players I kind of have to put into the top 20 here. I'm going to go with Rops for the first one. His Perfect World Major was unbelievable, but you just can't ignore some of the results and ratings he was kind of putting in over the course of the sort of mid part of the year. After Chengdu, that it looked a bit rough around the edges for him, and it deserves to be said that is the case. People might argue it's a bit high, honestly, but going off the fact that he made the finals of both majors, had a couple of wins, I think it's something, and that's why I've got him in here. And the reason why I've got the next player above him, which maybe some people will say again is a bit controversial, Brokey. Now, he had a really poor Perfect World Major overall, but he ascended in the playoffs. I don't know how it's absolutely incredible how good he looked in the playoffs compared to every other game he played in the whole event. FaZe magic, bro. It's ridiculous. Again, people might argue it's a little bit high for Brokey. If you look over the course of the year, he's actually had 4 EVPs. And that is the same as Wonderful, the same as JL, and the same as Flames. So I think he absolutely deserves to be above Rops, and maybe even people could argue that's a bit low for him. But we shall see, of course. Now, these next two players, I feel like I've done dirty. I feel quite bad about these, but we're going to go Yimpat 13, and we're going to go Exertion 12. Now, firstly, I had Xertion really high, 8, and then I just sort of dug deeper into the stats, and I was like, wait, his fall-off in rating when it comes to big matches and big playoff games is notable, and there are players in the scene right now that are just plainly better than him in the big games. Malbs have had their wins, don't get me wrong, and they absolutely deserve their flowers for having a really stunning year. They're getting ever closer in the big games. We've seen their growth this year in terms of, beating G2 in the big event playoffs, beating Mongols when it comes to, sort of a home crowd as such, which is 50-50 debatable, that one, but still. Beating Fury and Rio, I think, was a big one too. And, I think that's definitely progress for Malbs this year. There's an argument for Exertion to be a little bit higher. We've got the same amount of EVPs as malbs, Imma, who I didn't, of course, include. Malbs is an omission that I kind of didn't speak about when I spoke about Senzu in my 20th position. But I still think that little fall off in the big event games, in the big event playoffs, I think maybe is the reason why I've decided to bump him a little bit lower, I'm afraid. Now, one person I said who had 4 EVPs for the year, that is Mr. Wonderful. I do think people underestimate Wonderful a little bit because of how good, just because of how good Alexi and Blade's system is. We know it's a team that doesn't necessarily have an out-and-out superstar. JL and Bit are going to be higher on my list for obvious reasons. But I think people do underestimate Wonderful and how integral he is to the system. Even though he does have his bad whiffs in big moments, he can step up, and he has had some really impressive clutches in big moments this year. I think they've kind of forgotten about almost how good he's been in the clutch. And that's why I've got him above Brokey, above Exertion, above Wonderful. And if you look at the year, as I said, he's got the same amount of EVPs as JL, as Flames, as Brokey. So we can get an MVP, but we can talk about some of the players who's going to have the MVPs for this year coming in now. Now, I've got Spinks below Flames as a bit of a spoiler for the next few slots on the list, but he's just, again, it's pure consistency, I think, which is why I've got Spinks up here. He's got, again, a couple of EVPs over the course of the year, same as Antares and Imma. But Vitality have kind of had more consistent deep runs and won a few more things. And just the fact they won a Cologne. The Cologne is what is like kind of a tiebreaker for me because of the prestige of that event compared to like a regular IEM. Like a lower tier IEM, like a Dallas, like an IEM Rio. Like, of course, Imma got MVP for Rio. But, I have to have Spinks in the top 10, I think, just for the year that they've had. And now, the next player I've got in here, again, people might argue this is a bit high, or maybe even is... Again, it's really hard to tell. I've actually got Frozen splitting 2 Vitality players here. And I really like Frozen. I think he's been so integral for FaZe in the entire calendar year. He's kind of been the shining light in some of their poor performances as well. Amazing in the clutch. His rating, of course, the obvious stat that everyone looks toward, is very, very solid. It deserves to be up there. I think just for the fact that his pure out-and-out level in games where maybe FaZe have struggled slightly, from my own personal eye test. Again, maybe it's an eye test that's a little bit wrong in some people's eyes, but I think he deserves to be as a top 10 rifler this year. If we're looking like pure stats and pure out-and-out firepower, not looking at achievements whatsoever, you'd put probably Xantares top 10 instead of Spinks or Frozen, and you'd put maybe Frozen down with Brokey and Rops, or maybe in Rops' case, maybe not even on the list. But when you have to add in achievements, a couple of major finals, just too impressive a year to not put Frozen top 10 for me. He's got 3 EVPs, same as Donk, same as Bit, and same as Yimpat as well. So that's the reason I've got him here. And now 8th, which I've already kind of spoiled. It's actually one of my hardest ones to choose this year in terms of like who actually gets that 8th spot, because the top sort of 7 kind of speak for themselves, I feel, for me. Or top 6, I think, for sure. I've put Flamesy in here because of his extra performances and extra level in some of the big games compared to Spinks. Spinks kind of has disappeared ever so slightly in a couple of those games. Flames hasn't necessarily been that player to disappear. We know Vitality have disappeared in some big event playoffs. Perfect World Major goes without saying. They do struggle in major playoffs that aren't Blast Paris. Like it's kind of worrying for them going into the future of that team. But I think just the fact he's had a bit of an extra level this year. He's had 4 EVPs, like I said, 2 more than Spinks. Same as Brokey, as I said, same as JL, same as Wonderful. It's the reason I've got him ahead of Frozen, ahead of Spinks, and in that 8th spot, which I think is probably up for debate for a lot of people. Now, 7th is going to have to be where the big boys start. And big boy number 1 is Bit. Had a fantastic year. Some of the performances that he's sort of upped his level in, like, decider matches of finals is just unreal. I mean, like, he had a little bit of a slump for a while, and I make people question maybe whether necessarily even happy on the team in some circumstances with the current system. But I think he deserves to be here. Same amount of EVPs, as I said, as Frozen and Donk. And he, of course, got an MVP in EWC as well. As I said, Brokey got his MVP for Chengdu, which is kind of earlier in the year. Again, a sort of like recency bias, which you think about. That was maybe a bit different times of the year. You would talk about results being fresher in your memory. maybe that changes your mind. But I do think Bit, with his EWC MVP, with his consistent performances in big events, the fact that Navi have won so damn much, he has to be number 7 for me. Again, 6th is going to go without saying here. He has to be on the list. For me, there was a genuine argument that JL could have been top 4 in the world 2024 if they won the Perfect World Major and he was like MVP or something. Like, you can't... If a rifler got MVP for both majors in a calendar year, like, that hasn't happened since what? Was it Cold Zera? I could even be wrong on that one, but I don't think that's happened in a very, very, very long time, and I'll get back to that sort of point later on. But, you know, MVP in PGL Copenhagen, in a pro league as well, two for the year. He has to be in the top 6, and it's a shame that they bombed out of Perfect World Shanghai in a way, because I felt like there was a great chance he could be top 4 to crown the year, but it didn't happen, which is why I'm going to have him 6th. And it's why that I do think, even with maybe a few more achievements, a few more trophies for JL, I still think a certain man by the name of Shiro is going to be above him. He's had his bad moments this year. All the Spirit have had their bad moments. Zontix in interviews has been very open about how much of a mess it can be in the team sometimes. We saw the lack of composure in Spirit. That got fixed so fast, it felt like, in the period maybe a month or two going into Shanghai, and that's one of the main things that I think clinched Shanghai for them. It's not just the fact that Donk's composure was back to that sort of excellent level. It's the fact that everyone was looking a lot more composed, and I think that is one of the main reasons why they're up there. Shiro, people criticize him for being a bit too defensive, playing a bit too safe, save heavy, not really getting himself into the action in clutches at the right timings. That was evident even in a number of particular clutch rounds in Shanghai, but he has to be top 5. Next 4, I'm afraid, I think you all know, pretty obvious. Nico, unbelievable year. Again, I think it goes without saying, almost like in the same breadth as Xantares of longevity. Like, Xantares has been doing it since 2016 Space Soldiers. Nico's been doing it since 2016, 2015 malbs. Like, their level over the course of 8 years now, if not longer, is unreal. Nico's always going to be that player that's not going to be like top 1 in the whole calendar year, sadly, but he's always top 5, top 4. It always seems to be there or thereabouts, and he's had an incredible year, won some great events. And just to sort of grab onto what I was saying earlier, like, ridiculous amount of EVPs, 6. He's had 6 EVPs for 2024. Not a single MVP, if I'm not mistaken, which is a kind of a shame. Those have kind of been taken by Monazi, but 6 EVPs is truly, like, it's only second to the next man on my list, and that is Mr. Zaiwu. People were talking about going into Shanghai, who would be number 1 in the world. You've got 3 players all vying for it. Unfortunately, Vitality's failure in playoffs means that Zaiwu is absolutely locked 3rd for me. There was a small argument that maybe he gets himself into 2nd off of pure stats, and the fact that Monazi had quite a poor playoffs for G2 as well in Shanghai. But if you look at the numbers, Zaiwu has had 2 big MVPs, a Pro League and Cologne. Cologne is a huge MVP to get. And he's also had the most EVPs in 2024 with 7. So that's why the argument could be that he could be above Monazi. I would totally get it if he's above Monazi. It might be a bit of a controversial one, but I really see a world where that could be something that flips here. Just because of the fact he's got 1 more EVP and had a Cologne MVP. But if you want to do it purely off of MVPs and maybe some of the flashy, ridiculous clips we've seen from this year, I'm going to have to go with it. Monazi is number 2. If he did perform to a ridiculous level in the Shanghai playoffs and Donk/Spirit didn't, he could have easily been number 1, as I said with Zaiwu. But he's had 3 MVPs: Dallas, full final, and the World Final. Again, it's not a Cologne level MVP, which is what Zaiwu got. But he's also had 5 EVPs, and he, you know, it goes without saying how incredible his year has been. If he stays on G2, remains to be seen what G2's plans are going to be, of course. There's talks about maybe plucking one of those stunning tier 2 players from the calendar year, like I think Jota from Sangal has been talked about, with a couple of rumours on Twitter. But, it will be a shame that he's going to lose Nico, most likely, but I have to say maybe that could make him ascend even further as the main star of G2 and someone that can really put the team on the back, continue to do so, and keep himself in the discussion for maybe top 1 2025. Now, the main man, goes without saying, Mr. Donk. What a fucking year this man has had. Truly insane. I remember casting him in qualifiers for like Bet Boom Datcha events in 2023, just when he got upgraded from the academy, from Spirit Academy to the main roster with Zontix, with Art Frost, and it was evident that he was going to do incredible work. The fact that he's had a year as ridiculous as this, starting off with IEM Kato, that record-breaking performance, insane. 2 MVPs that people will say are like Banana Cup MVPs with both of the Bet Boom Datchas, but he's had the Blast Spring Final, and of course he's had the one and only Shanghai Major. It's a ridiculous performance, and the way he ascended after what was, as I mentioned when I spoke about Shiro, sort of a time in the year where Spirit were looking like they were lacking composure. Donk was smashing his desk. He was getting quite tilted quite quickly, I feel like, when things weren't going his way and Spirit was struggling. But I almost feel like at this point as well, with how he, the swagger at walking over to shake hands with FaZe, but how he comes across in interviews, like he's so humble. Like he says he's happy to be a top 100 player if his team wins, and all stuff like this. I'm sure maybe deep down in his heart, and maybe even in the back of his mind, he thinks to himself, listen, I'm just the GOAT here, bro. Like, I'm aim dueling everyone and literally destroying everyone. But, coming across humble is a really good thing to do, and he's doing exactly that, but he shouldn't. Like, he needs to own this shit, because, he has had probably one of the most ridiculous opening year as a professional in a big tier 1 org ever. And I will kind of liken this to Lewis Hamilton at McLaren in 2007. If there are any Formula 1 watchers here, any sort of knowers of how Formula 1 was back then and how ridiculous Lewis Hamilton's rookie season was with McLaren in 07, you can kind of liken the two, how he almost, except the fact that Donk actually won the championship. He won a major, right? Like, that's what kind of elevates it to, in that analogy, even further than that. I think it's one of the most ridiculous things. I don't think we'll ever see it again. I really don't think we'll ever see it again, and that is why we're going to stick with that. But anyway, here is the list. Of course, as I said, can be debated. I'm going to save that right now. I think there's a lot here that will be very, very wrong and very surprising as well. I think, like, there's a good discussion I had with a couple of friends of mine, like literally 8th to maybe even 16th. Like, all these players are totally up for debate. Senzu probably won't even... Senzu and Keserato, good risk of them not even being in there. They could maybe put Immer or Zontix in just for their achievements this year. I think that'd be very, very fair, honestly. I just wanted to recognise Keserato's sort of carry performances for Furia and Senzu's year with Mongols. So I think it's kind of more likely to have Immer and maybe Zontix in here somewhere. Maybe even malbs could creep in for his incredible year. But yeah, that is what I'm going to stick with. And that is how we're going to end the year off content-wise. So thank you very much, guys, for all the likes and everything on the videos. I hope you all have a really lovely Christmas. I've worked like 49 events, 140, 50-odd broadcast days in 2024. I can only hope it is not too long before I'm back on your screens on a Counter-Strike broadcast in 2025. I've already got a couple of things booked, so I hope to see you very soon. Much love. Have a nice holidays. Have some fun with your family. Treasure it. And I'll speak to you all very soon. Cheers.